Hey, how's it going?
Hey, Lana.
Thank you for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm looking forward to chatting with you. Why don't we start off with you sharing a little bit about yourself for those listening, so they can hear about what you do.
Yeah, sure. So, hi, everyone. I'm Adam. I go by AdamLearns or AdamLearns Live online. I was streaming from 2015 to 2020, working on a game called Botland. And then, right toward the tail end of that, shifted to Adam Learns and kind of rebranded myself. And now I would say I am just getting back in the swing of things. I went to work at Google for 3 years and came back to streaming last week and dropped into Lana's stream. She said, "Hey, do you want to join my podcast?" I said, "Sure." And what I'm working on content wise is mostly what I'd call like tech education stuff. I try to learn things and then I turn around and try to teach them. And so I haven't fully gotten back into the swing of that. It's been only maybe 6 business days, but I'm excited. It's been cool being back and I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, it's nice to see you back. You started back like ages ago. We were both, in the early days of the game dev streaming and development streaming in general.
Yeah, it's gone through a lot too. I was looking through some old commands that I had, and the history of Twitch development, I think it started in some random tiny category and then shifted to creative. And I think you might have caught the tail end of that. You started in 2020 streaming, right?
Oh no, I've been streaming
Oh,
for about 7 years now, I think.
okay. Okay.
Yeah.
You started working on Strain in 2020, right?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
correct. Yeah.
Okay. Got you. Yeah. So 7 years. So I was going to say it's been, I think maybe only a tiny bit longer for me because it was 2015. But yeah, it was creative and then it shifted to whatever it is now, software and game development. So it's been a roller coaster, although it's kind of felt the same no matter where we're streaming in. And
Yeah, it's also been science and technology for a bit. Do you remember that?
oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I forgot
and
about
then
that little
the,
chapter.
like, highlight or, like, the only time it would get attention is, like, when NASA streamed in there. It's like, "Oh, people found our category."
Yeah, that's actually another phenomenon I think that happens a lot, which is if the category doesn't have a lot of people, then it feels like you're not pulling in new people without doing extra
Mhm.
work off platform. So something like this podcast probably helps, having a YouTube channel, having whatever other games to pull people in. So I don't know if you've noticed
Yeah.
that too.
Yeah, I've talked to other content creators and especially YouTubers, and I just feel like Twitch is really not great for discovery because we're so tucked away on a huge platform, and I don't know how many people on the platform are looking for game development, but I feel like it doesn't really bring in new people very often.
Yeah, and what I've found is the people who stumble on it say, "Yeah, I would watch this," but they never would have found it. So usually through
Mhm.
raids of other people. And actually, this is something I've noticed a while ago. I tried branching out into other streams, just people I would watch normally. I watched a lot of Pro StarCraft 2 or Hearthstone, and I'd raid some of those streamers, and every once in a while they would raid back and they'd say, "Oh, okay, this is content that I wouldn't mind dumping my viewers into." That's I think how we could pull other people into the category is by
Mm.
maybe reaching out farther, but it's always just kind of a just a gamble on whether they'll like the content.
No, I totally agree with that, and I do like to try to, like, make friends with people outside of game development because A, it's healthy, and B, it's nice to just get to know other streamers, but yeah, it's harder to make connections with other streamers, I guess, that are
Yeah,
not
I think so. Do you
influencers.
ever feel like you're in a game dev or a tech bubble?
Lately, a little bit, I was like, because it's funny because before I used to not have a lot of friends who did game development or even programming, and then I started going to, like, coding meetups, game development meetups, connecting more with people who do make games. And now, like, almost everyone I talk to are all game developers. It's funny.
Yep. I feel like that's what happens. By the way, was that a mindful push you did to try to go to coding meetups and those
It
sorts of
was at
events?
first, and it's part of why I started streaming in the first place because I wanted to connect with other people who were interested in the same thing as me. But now, like, I think it just happens accidentally, subconsciously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's nice. I feel like there's a shared language amongst either game developers or engineers or whatever realms I associate myself with, where it almost makes communication faster because you sort of know what to expect. I was just home visiting family and talking to some people there where I'm outside of that tech bubble is very different. It's like I'm explaining concepts differently, I'm talking differently. So I think there's good and bad to it for sure.
It's true. Yeah. Sometimes I'll talk to people who, and they're like, do you play video games? Or like, no, never play video games. I'm like, well, I don't know how to explain everything I spend my time doing and thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Although you probably had the same thing happen in the opposite direction where someone explains what they do for a living and you're just like, I don't understand this. And sometimes I ask friends like 3 or 4 times, like, what do you do again? I know it's something with medicine, but what exactly?
Right.
So yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's how we probably sound to some people. Like, well, we do something with computers. Game dev is a little bit more understandable, I think.
That's true. That's true. And I think that's when it is actually healthy is to when you find people who do stuff that you're not familiar with and you're like, "Oh, how does that work?" And then they tell you and you're like, "Oh, I that's good information to learn," right?
Yeah. And I like intersecting with that. I think it's hard when I don't know what questions to ask them to, because I'm like, I'm naturally interested in other people and I want to take an interest. And sometimes I don't know what is appropriate. So I have, yeah, some friends where I'm just like, can you just explain what's going on in your life?
Yeah.
And I'll just listen and have fun.
I think
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's easy to be shy when asking questions about things you're not familiar with, but I think it's good to do, and I think people appreciate when people take an interest in their things that they do, you know?
Yeah.
So it's good that you do it.
They generally do. I want to ask if you've seen a certain phenomenon that I've seen, and you've been doing this podcast now, so you might have seen it. Do you find that streamers are self-centered? It's a very leading question, incredibly leading.
Um, outside of myself, probably not, no. I don't know if that's necessarily a pattern, but I do think that it does encourage a certain type of socializing that you need to make an effort to, like, not do, if that makes sense?
I
Like
think so. It's the whole you're streaming to an audience or you're used to an audience and you're used to no one interrupting your monologues. And so you just keep going on and on and on. By the way, this is not a hint at anything and this is not a jab at anybody in particular. It's just I've been to some meetups before where it was targeted at streamers. And I was just talking to another streamer about this the other day that it's almost like everyone is pitching to you. That's sort of how I felt, but that was a room full of strangers who all happen to be streamers and all happen to probably want to grow as a streamer or they wouldn't be going to these things. So probably
Mm,
some selection bias there.
mm. Yeah, you know, I find that a little bit with game developers too. Um, not everybody, but ever so often you'll meet strangers and they're pitching the thing that they're doing or talking about. Um, I also like I think that a lot of people like forgot how to socialize since COVID.
Yeah, I think so too. And actually, this is another thing I was asking some friends about recently. I used to go out to restaurants with my friends or with my wife, and now I feel like we're still getting food from outside, but we're never really going to restaurants anymore. Have you noticed
Mm.
any changes like that post pandemic?
I think it's harder to get a group together, but like you gotta work on it. I don't think it
Yeah.
like it used to be people be like, oh yeah, I'll just swing by, no big deal. Now it'll be like, I don't know, develop a communities and put effort into it and like give people information and expect people to not show up and expect people to not show up because they are sick and it's taken more seriously now.
Yeah, the
Um,
sickness part I totally understand. I think the other things, it just feels like some things aren't totally normal again. And
yeah.
also, I feel bad for kids who were in school or people who were just entering college or something where it was like a big phase of their life and it's just just vanishes.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
it's
yeah,
definitely affected people. Yeah, and streamers, maybe. I don't to be honest, I don't know a ton of people who stream outside of
really? You
like
haven't met
yeah.
a lot of people in real life?
No, not really, and I think that's part of why I wanted to do this podcast because 'cause I'm like, I don't it'd be nice to connect with other streamers and content creators too because it's an interesting, like, thing to pursue, right? It's like a kind of a passion, kind of a entrepreneurial thing, and it's really interesting to hear how people's journeys started and how they're going.
Yeah, yeah, definitely very niche. The reason I was surprised, I feel like for as long as you've been streaming, there have been probably people who've been like, "Oh, do you want to go to TwitchCon?" Or "I'm in the area," or "You're visiting somewhere else and you're in their area," and you find out. I love those sorts of chance meetups. Every once in a while, it's a little like, "Oh, you're different from how I thought you were in person," or there's some surprise, I guess, a little bit. But mostly, it's been a great experience and I've met some people several times now. So I feel like I don't know, it adds to that community when I met those people.
Oh,
And
yeah,
you're
for
meeting them
sure.
online, so it's not like you're not meeting people, just not in person.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have met a handful of people in person. It is nice. It's like it feels like you're humanizing that connection, which is feels really good to do, healthy.
Yeah. Yeah. Plus, the other thing I thought about is you tend to meet people doing the activity that you do the most, which is usually work for a lot of people. You're doing that 8 hours a day or so. And then afterward, maybe you got some hobbies that take you outside. Maybe you're doing a team sport or something. But it's a lot of the same people, I think. With streaming, you reach so many different people and in different countries that network gets larger. And I don't know. I always say, like, if I go visit the Netherlands, for example, there's like 3, 4 people I'd reach out to and I've never met them in person. And I don't know. It'd be cool to experience.
Yeah, it's nice. It kind of makes the world feel a little bit smaller.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think it's nice. Nice
So
connection.
I have a lot of questions
Oh yeah,
on
sure.
this
And I'm yep.
topic.
I have some too, by the way.
I wanted to hear all about like okay, I'll ask a few questions. You answer whatever you feel good to answer and however order you want to answer.
Sure.
Um so you streamed for a while and then you left, you went I didn't know where you were, but you went and you worked at Google. That's super cool, first of all. I want to hear about that as well. Uh what made you decide to go to stop streaming? Did you anticipate coming back? What was it like leaving? What was it like coming back? How did that all play out?
Yeah. So I'll start at the beginning, I suppose, which is what made me stop streaming. So the pandemic had just started. It was at the beginning of 2020. And I actually saw it as a boon at first. I hope that doesn't sound insensitive. But I thought, oh, I can finally invest a lot of time and have almost no distractions. I just started AdamLearns. And back then, I'd been working on Botland for so long and it wasn't a commercial success that I was trying to make something stick. And AdamLearns was that attempt. And I didn't continue for too long before I thought, okay, I should just go back to the industry and get some actual money. And then, so that's what led to me stopping, was basically money. And
Mhm.
what led to me starting again was maybe a year into Google. I just thought, this isn't the same level of fulfillment that I had doing my own thing. And the quote I've been throwing around recently, I just read something randomly on Reddit. It was someone who said, if people said the things to me that they did in my last 2 weeks at the company, I would have stayed forever. So it's like people come out of the woodworks and they say nice things to you. And they're like, oh, hey, you were invaluable on this project or you really helped me out. And this is not my quote, right? This is just some random person on the internet. But I felt that same thing on Twitch. People are much more vocal about positive things that they have to say. Some people are also vocal about negative things, but it's usually pretty easy to weed them out. You can just ban or purge them or something like that. And so you end up in sort of a feedback loop of I'm doing things that people like. And so they're saying positive things so that I'm doing more of those things that people like. And so I missed that. And I also missed the creative freedom of being able to do my own thing. So Google was a lot of, we have deadlines, we have business needs, we have a way of doing things. And it wasn't like they were so strict and I felt like I was shackled to what I was doing for work, but it wasn't the same as, hey, I get to make my own projects, set my own timelines, pick my own technologies, pick who I work with, etc. So I think that kind of covers everything, but that's probably a lot of information.
Yeah, no, yeah, I gotta let that all sink in. So you were at Google for 3 years, did you say?
Yeah, 3 years and 1 day.
Oh, wow. So, okay. What what did you do at Google?
So half of the time I was working on Google, what's GCP stand for now? Google Cloud Platform. Yeah. I always say the acronym and I completely forgot what it stood for. Google Cloud Platform. I was working on something I probably can't talk about. But then the second half, I was working on Android Studio, which for those who don't know is the editor you use to make Android apps. So
Okay.
that was almost totally open. My code is out there. Bugs I produced are out there. Bugs I solved are out there. So uh, yeah, working on those two different projects was very, there's a reason I had switched teams. I didn't really like the Google Cloud Platform sort of culture and way of pursuing things. And again, I can't talk too much about it, but it all fell under that umbrella of corporate life. And this is another thing I've been trying to formulate thoughts on recently is I think every corporation has an infinite amount of work for their workers to do. So if you were to wrap up your 40 hours a week and say, you know what, I want more, they're not going to say, well, we're plumb out of tasks for you. They'll give you more things. And if you work more, they'll just keep giving you more things. And if your manager is not putting a clamp on that at some point, you'll just burn yourself out.
Hmm.
So I think that leads to a sort of rat race if you're not finding fulfillment in your work where you aim for promotions or to do better or to have more visibility. And I think it can be negative impact on your mental health. So um yeah, I kind of wanted to be out of that realm and pursue this again and kind of see where it goes.
That's interesting. And I can kind of relate to that. I tend to be somebody who like I do enjoy like getting invested in things and like working hard on things. And I've definitely been at jobs where I work really hard and I put a lot in and I know it's doing well, but like if it wasn't specifically asked for, that hard work doesn't necessarily translate to like any reward for it. And that can definitely I can definitely understand where that can have an effect on your mental health. You're like, I'm doing so much work and I'm just being treated like everyone who's putting in bare minimum or whatever, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think there are a lot of a lot of facets to that. I think mental health and kind of everything that you and I do, entrepreneurial things, decision fatigue, setting your own hours, carving out the time to do all this stuff, dealing with the internet, which is something kind of unique to streamers because you're doing it in real time. All those things play into your mental health. And it's something you and I were talking about just before the interview started, actually, which was how you structure your day and how if you were to do these interviews earlier, it might not lead to you doing game development for a particular day, which probably
Mhm.
leads to you feeling a certain way afterward, which then plays into the next day or the rest of the week or, yeah, feeling burned out or something. So I think there are a lot of aspects to mental health that are fun to talk about and probably need to be explored more so that we can work on improving it.
Yeah. And no one, I mean, who's really carving out that? It's not like there's um anybody, like everyone works independently on social media, so it's not like there's people looking down like, "Hey, you guys doing okay?"
Yeah,
You have to check
yeah,
in on yourself, really.
yeah, I agree. And that's where we could lean on other people, especially as a streamer. It's like one of the things that I said to my chat recently was I want you to hold me to taking breaks, ideally every hour. It was something I just never really paid attention to. So it might be 3 hours pass and I'm finally like, what am I doing? Like, I need to get up from my computer and actually go do something different.
Mhm.
So, in those senses, I think you can kind of have these safeguards. But yeah, in general, at the end of the day, it's like, okay, you turn off your computer, you've got your friends, your family, and yourself. And those people are the ones who have to help figure this out, I guess.
That's true, yeah. Having a support system and having a life outside of your stream and your work can definitely be a good way to make sure you're finding a balance.
Yeah. Do you feel like streaming for you, game development for you is like the lion's share of your life? Does it feel that way? Does it feel like I've got a healthy balance between work and everything else?
Mm. That's a tough question. I don't know how to put it. I want to be streaming and doing game development more than most other things, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like the few things that would be more appealing to me is like socializing, doing something with other people. I love doing that.
Hmm.
But like hobbies, like it's hard to find a hobby that's as interesting as my main passion. So like I'll play piano for a bit or I'll do something random. But then like after a little bit I'm like I just want to get back to the game. I want to get back to what I was doing. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I definitely spend the vast majority of my time streaming and or doing game development. But I don't know if that's unhealthy. I don't know what makes that healthy or unhealthy, I guess.
I think if you've been doing it for as long as you have and you haven't felt any repercussions, then it's probably healthy. I guess you could argue that maybe long term there's going to be some just craziness that appears out of nowhere. But hopefully
Right.
that never happens.
Yeah. What about you? Do you feel like you have a good balance?
So I've only been back in the game, so to speak, for whatever it is. Yeah, the 6, 7 days. So as of late, I think so. But I think what happened to me before, I streamed for about 32 hours a week. And for me, that was my absolute limit. Like if I went to 34 hours a week, I would just need some time off. And I didn't mindfully determine that number of hours. It's just what happened. But I also think I was a ball of stress and worry in the times that I wasn't streaming because I kept thinking, I've been working on this project for so long. This has been the thing I've been betting so much on. And if it doesn't pan out, what will happen? How will people look at me, et cetera, et cetera? All these doubts that you have. So um,
Mm.
I think that I want to have it under control this time around. And I have a very sort of process heavy flow to my week where I start and on Monday, I look at my tenets that I wrote for myself, which might sound cheesy, but they're little principles that I wrote that I want to stick to. And so they
Mm.
might be things as like be professional if you're rejecting somebody. So it's don't just say like, ah, nah, I'm done, like go away or something. It's like, oh, hey, here's why I don't like this thing. Or um, something like that could be a small example. And something bigger could be don't burn out. And that's the biggest one for me, I think, is I want to make sure that my stream is sustainable. So for me, that means don't work too much. Try not to think about it so much. Try not to be the ball of stress that I sort of used to identify as.
That sounds good. I really like those. They're almost like pillars
Yeah.
to yeah.
Yeah. That's how I look at it.
Do you have like a list of them or is it just different each time?
Yeah. I have a list of them. I try to make as much of this stuff public as I can. So uh, I could, share a document or something. I'm not suggesting I do that now. But do you
Yeah.
want to see it now?
I mean, if there's like 50, that's maybe different. Maybe I could just hear a few. I'd love to
I
hear
will
more
do
of
you
them.
one better.
Uh-huh.
and I will do this, and then I will actually transform this so that you can read this.
Ooh, cool.
Whoa.
Ah,
Um,
technology.
so anyway, some quick ones here. Things like taking breaks, I already kind of mentioned. I know you can't see all this stuff. Sustainability is one of the big ones on the mentality front. Things like being bad and embracing failure are also ones that I have on here. So like, don't be scared to try something. Don't be scared to focus on improving rather than kind of where you want to be. What other things here? Forming a community, posture is a good one. There, that's it. We're gonna stop there. That's a few.
Those are great. That's really interesting. Um, okay, with that in mind, do you have a long-term goal as you're returning, or you're playing it by ear a little bit?
So I am very much a planner at my core. And so I looked at how long do I want to be doing this for? What do I want to be doing exactly? And generally, the long term goal with streaming is to settle into a routine that I feel fills that fulfillment gap that I felt at Google and doesn't burn me out. So it's basically like those two things and like a tiny bit of monetization in there somewhere, through whatever products I make or services or through Twitch subs or something. So in short, if I can continue doing this for the next like 20 years, I probably will.
Hmm.
And I want to make sure I want to ask you a bunch of things about this stuff too. So, one, what were you doing before you started streaming?
I was I was doing user experience. I was focusing on user experience design,
Yeah.
um, doing like banking applications and public-facing websites.
Okay. And so, would you say it was mostly, I know you said banking applications. Banks to me means larger companies, but smaller tech parts of that company. Is that generally accurate?
Um, I mean, it was directly for the bank, but there was definitely like teams that were more. I mean, there was a big user experience team for
Yeah.
each of the banks I worked for.
I see.
They took it seriously, which I appreciated. Actually, they really did. That was one of the places I've worked at banks where they took user experience seriously and they like really enabled you to do your job well. I
Mhm.
felt like in the past, people they want to have great user experience, but they don't want to invest in like testing or user feedback or any form of input. So it's like, what's the point of doing user experience if you don't have anything to base it off of? But they were
Yeah.
really good. They had a big team. They had lots of resources for us. So that's kind of how that setup was.
Okay, okay. Yeah, and so what was the shift for you from that into game dev? I know you said it's been your passion to do game dev, so presumably that had something to do with it.
That's a long story. And like, or not necessarily a long story, but it's, it was a lot of things that contributed to me making that decision,
Mhm.
and it's hard for me to even, like, identify them all, I think.
Mm.
Sometimes people will bring something up, and I'm like, "That was part of it. I didn't even, like, acknowledge that before."
Yeah.
Um, but I think it really came down to, like, just really being passionate about it, and I wanted to be doing game development, more, but it was so hard to find the energy outside of my regular job and maintaining a social life back then. And um, I just, yeah, I found like there was so much to learn that I didn't. Um, I felt like it was going to take forever to learn it, let alone to make something.
Yeah.
And so what I ended up doing was for a long period of time, I just kept saving up and working towards taking time off. I looked at it, I had been saving money for a while, trying to like be wise and make good financial decisions. And I decided to put it towards an education. And I was like, I looked at going back to do a master's. I looked at going to do a different type of degree. I looked at changing fields. I looked at a lot of different things. And it felt like the wisest thing for me to do, I don't think I, the wisest thing for me to do, it seemed, was to put the money instead of paying for a degree, was just to pay my bills and then teach myself in that time. And then
Mhm.
I can do it as long as I need to instead of committing to 4 years or whatever, 2 years, whatever the degree would be. So I was like, okay, I'll save up, I'll pay my bills. I'll try this for a few months or so. And thank goodness everywhere I'd worked previously, when I quit, they're like, if you ever want to come back, let us know. We've liked working with you, thank goodness. So I didn't feel like it was a too extreme. Like
Mhm.
I had the I can always go back if I want to kind of thing. But I enjoyed it so much and I was able to, make ends meet. And so I've just been doing it since.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
What made you start the streaming aspect of that?
The streaming was came a little bit first because I part of like I was saying earlier, like wanting to connect with other game developers. I wanted to connect
Mm.
with people doing programming, and because I was doing user experience and I missed doing programming and having friends who knew programming. Uh so I wanted to connect with people in that way, and it was really rewarding. And then when I was working from home by myself, it just felt like I just started doing it more because now I wanted to connect with people more because I didn't even get the regular day to day at a job connections with people. So yeah.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I was working a long time ago in an internship, literally in my parents' basement, and I think I went nuts that summer. I noticed that my personality changed. I was like a little bit more aggressive. It was just being in total isolation. I felt that did that.
Mm,
And so I was a little fearful of that when I started on Twitch back in 2015. And after about a year, I looked back and I realized, wait, that hasn't happened. And hopefully it doesn't happen. And now looking back 8 years, it hasn't happened at any point in that time. And I think the reason why is that even though you're talking to people you can't see, they're still talking back and you know that they're humans, most of them. and and that kind of keeps you socially together at least enough to replace what you would have gotten at work. It's not the face to face. I feel like nothing replaces that, and
mm,
even this is not a replacement for that, right? I think video calls are amazing, and ideally there's some metaverse thing in the future or something like that that makes it even better, but it still probably won't be like being there face to face. So I get that.
yeah,
I
that's
get the
true.
wanting to be around people, and since then you probably formed a bunch of connections, and yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure you have too. Have oh, here's I've got a lot of questions for you after,
Yeah.
taking a break and working at Google, but let's stay on topic with the stream. Uh, did a lot of people who watched you before come back after, and do you remember them, and like is it, or does it feel like a whole, like you're starting over?
Yeah, a ton came back, a ton. I was a little surprised. I remember when I started streaming a long time ago and I took a vacation and I thought people aren't going to come back. I've already messed up the schedule. And then without fail, people would come back. It's not like they forget about you, right? It's like a week or a month or something. And so after 3 years, I thought, okay, now this is definitely it, right? But they were mostly there. And then did I remember them? Yes, mostly. Some people have changed names, and I'm not even
Mm,
sure sometimes if they're cognizant that they've changed names in 3 years. So it's like,
right.
hey again, Adam. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't remember. And then the other thing, and I don't know if this happens to you too, this is some weird sensory thing, but if they've changed their name color, that can be
Yeah,
enough to throw me off. Yeah.
yeah.
It's like,
It really
that,
does.
yep, the name length, the name color, and then the name of self, of course. But yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, it was nice to see. It was very heartening to know that people are still there and they're willing to support and I don't know, just kind of return. So yeah, I like that.
That's great. I'm glad to hear that. Wow. So how does it feel to be back?
It feels good. It feels a little bit like, what did I get myself into? Because right now, I think there's a lot of stuff that I want to do that I feel almost needs to be done at the same time. So, for
Mm,
example, I've been working on a bot recently just to respond to chat messages, to eventually do things in Discord. And that's something I feel needs to be done. When people come into my stream and they're like, what are you working on? And I don't have a command for them, then that means that I need to respond verbally to them, which then takes time from what I'm going to be doing. And also inundates the people who are already there with answers they've already heard. So something like that needed to happen. And now the most recent thing is, while I take breaks, because I just said I wanted to focus on mental health. So I'm taking a break every hour. And in that 5 minutes, nothing's happening on stream. It's just a static image that says, I'll be right back in 5 minutes. Those are the kinds of things I need to do, but also want to do. And there's only so much time in the day. And it's sort of like what you were mentioning about thinking about game dev when you're not doing game dev or thinking about streaming. I want to do that. And yet at the same time, I'm aware that when I went from 32 hours of streaming per week up to 34, that it was too much. So am I going to push into too much territory early on and violate my one major tenet of sustainability? Or will I be able to balance things and still get everything done? So it's a tiny bit frazzling on that sense, but at the
mm.
same time, there's no real deadline. There's no one breathing down my neck. So I realize I got to take it easy. It's the old me being stressed out and trying to come back and best
That's
future me.
You sound like such a developer when you describe this. You're like 30 is fine, 34 not fine.
Yep. Yep.
Very
That's it.
quantifiable. But I find like I appreciate that you're getting these metrics and you're keeping track of that. That's a really good way to do it. Though I do think that a bit of both is good, because like sometimes, especially lately the weather's changing here. It's getting cold. It's dark at like there's basically no daylight at this
Yeah.
point in the winter, and I feel like I have to just get more sleep. It does. It's just, it means I need to have slightly shorter day on stream or slightly longer sleeping, whatever, and then I just feel more myself when I do those things. And sometimes it's hard to quantify all that. Though I guess if you really kept track of everything, including dates, time of year, all of that, you could probably get like really accurate numbers.
You probably could, and I think that someday we'll be wearing a device that just tracks this all for us and says, "Okay, it's 9:43 p.m. Go to sleep," because otherwise you're going to wake up 17 minutes later and feel
Yeah.
bad. Um, I tried something to this endeavor, and a lot of what I say probably sounds silly, but this is earnest. What I'm about to say. At one point, I thought to myself, and this is incredibly developer focused: could I live my life by a flow chart that I create? And so I ended up realizing this is stupid. I don't want to live my life that way because you want some freedom and creativity. But there is one little nugget of value that I think is potentially spreadable to other people, which is the stress flow chart, which is when you, Lana, are stressed out, or when I, Adam, am stressed out, what do you do that makes you feel better? And chances are those things are probably roughly the same. So it's like when you're stressed out because you had a hard day at work or someone said something that rubbed you the wrong way, the way you end up feeling better probably is something that's in a small subset for you of the things you could possibly do. So maybe it's something like, okay, I'll go buy ice cream and watch TV or something. Or maybe it's like, I'll go on a walk and clear my head. So I've been trying to build this flow chart up and kind of add to it as I get stressed and everything. And so, yeah, that's what led to, I think, that whole 32-hour observation. And that's what led to, I don't know, these other things that happen. Something like you mentioning needing more sleep, like that's not necessarily stress, but something like that could go in there.
No, I think you're absolutely right. That's an interesting one. And there's two things that I love going to if I'm stressed out and I need a break from things. In the summer, I love to go for a motorcycle ride. It's like I just find it like it takes my mind off things. It's kind of
Yep.
fun. It's kind of like exhilarating. And then like I come back, I feel refreshed. And then the other thing is I foster kittens.
Yeah.
Like just spending time with animals, kittens, cats, whatever happens to be around at that time. It's like the best. I just feel I come back, I'm like happy.
So have
The challenging thing is both of those, like kittens are mostly born during the warm seasons in Canada. So like in the
mhm.
winter, it's not a lot of cats, no motorcycles. So I need to find like winter versions of those now.
Can you foster cats? Because they probably still need homes in wintertime, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I did do that last winter. It was really nice.
Okay. Is that not as calming as kittens?
It's harder because I actually find I get more attached to adult cats because they just have so much more personality. I feel like they are actually very smart. And
Mhm.
there's like the kittens, you have them until they're old enough to get adopted. So it's usually 2 months. And after 2 months, you give them up and they're gonna be like loved and they're cute and and there's so many of them. It just feels like a natural process. But with the adult cats, I don't know. I got really attached to the last one. So I'm like, I gotta be like emotionally prepared to foster an adult cat.
Do you not have a cat? Could you adopt one?
um no, I'm not really in the right setup right now to like
I see.
take one on full time and
Okay.
I don't know if I'm going to be in this location for a long time. I don't know what the next one will be, so I don't want to take that on until
No, that
I'm
makes sense.
sure.
By the
Yeah.
way, random question: have you ever taken a kitten on your motorcycle?
No.
Okay.
There's Okay, so I watched the recent like Batman movie not too long ago, and there's a
Mhm.
scene where Catwoman's like she's just like talking to Batman. They're like outside somewhere, and she's got a cat with her for no reason, and then she just puts the cat in the side bag of the motorcycle, I assume, and then rides away. And that was like the one of the funniest things. Like, why does she even have the cat?
Yeah.
Why is it on a motorcycle?
Totally random. But I was thinking if one thing calms you down, then two things would like super bring you to zero.
Oh,
But yeah,
true.
probably a bad idea.
I have seen social media of people bringing cats on motorcycles. I don't know if I'd feel safe with that though.
I don't know either. I've mostly seen him in bicycles or something. There's at least one YouTuber who brings his cats out a lot, and they seem to enjoy it. Also going at
Mm,
like probably 10 miles per hour rather than 60.
mhm.
Um, okay, wait. I want to pull up. I have a bunch of questions that I had saved, and I want to make sure I get to one of them. One that I
Okay.
remember is, "What's your favorite kind of apple?" Which has nothing to do with anything.
Ooh, I like to switch it up every so often. I like a
Yeah,
good gala.
yeah.
No, Honeycrisp.
Honeycrisp? Okay. Honeycrisp is good. Have
What
you
about
heard of
you?
appleratings.com?
Is that what you're asking? Like Apple, like the food?
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Okay.
definitely. Yeah.
Wait, what's your
Not
favorite apple? Now I'm
Fuji.
okay. Fuji's good. Fuji's
Okay,
good.
so this site actually exists where they just rank apples, and it's a comedian who started this site. But anyway, I don't think Fuji is very high up there. But it's still my favorite. Anyway, I did pull up the list of questions. So this one I wanted to ask because this is relevant to just kind of today in the zeitgeist, but not necessarily what we've talked about so far. What has been your experience with AI so far?
Oh, that's an interesting one. That comes up a lot. It's an
Yeah.
interesting topic, and I feel like especially for developers, it's a big one. Oh, I don't know. It's like where do I even begin? I have mixed feelings on it because I do feel like there is real potential for disaster with
Yeah.
AI.
Yeah.
And I
You
think
mean
it's
like a
like
singularity kind of event where
not
it becomes
even
okay,
necessarily like look at like imagine if there was a okay, I don't want to go like doomer.
sure, but doomer thing about to
It
happen.
could be, let's just say it could be a very powerful weapon
Yeah.
if it's in the wrong hands, and it's in everyone's hands now, and it's especially in like companies who are starting up their own AIs and they have all the access to um quantum computing as well. Like it's just it feels like the wild west of technology. Like these tools are being developed faster than we can even, I feel like, fully understand them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think so. And I think the original news that we'd heard was, hey, you can talk to it and you can't really tell it's a computer, unlike, the
Sorry, you're getting a little the connection must be bad and you're getting a little garbled. Could you say it again?
so I think earlier this year, as in like January, February, March, AI was just becoming a hot topic for a lot of people outside of the tech world. And it was, hey, look at what our new, it was pretty much ChatGPT. Look at what ChatGPT can do now that it couldn't before. And then it turned into things like image synthesis. And now it's turned into basically everything. It's like someone shared a song with me that was computer generated, from the vocals to the backing track to probably not the lyrics, although maybe. And it's like, well, that wasn't possible 2 3 years ago. So I think there's a lot, like you said, it's a wild west right now. I think there's a lot to be explored there, and I'm maybe thinking a little bit more positively because in the doomer scenario we're goners anyway, probably. So yeah, I'm thinking more from what can we do that's good.
Yeah, no, with so I think that there is definitely like a risk with it and it's a little bit scary, but I'm also really like excited by it and I think it's super cool and like I find all of the advancements with it really interesting. So
Well,
I feel mixed feelings with it.
I do too. I think one of the things you talked about also before this was the amount of work that goes into editing, even the podcast, right? And I don't know how many YouTube videos you produce. I've seen the game trailers; those are probably pretty highly edited. But imagine for something like a podcast where you just basically feed it this stream or this video and audio, and you're like, "All right, it's a podcast. Just go make it." Right? I think eventually AI, and probably maybe already or something, it could do that. And that's the kind of tedious thing I would love to carve out and never have to do again. It's just the kind of video editing or audio editing that it's like, you know what you want in the end. And the AI probably knows.
It's funny because we get all these tools like AI is making an entire movie, it's replacing artists, but like I can't seem to find even just like for example, I started doing podcasts. This one will probably be your video and my video side by side, as I mentioned to you. But
Mm.
before I was like trying to crop whenever there's basically audio, it should switch to the audio. And just finding like a plugin for that, I can't find a free one, and they're all like quite expensive. And it's like the amount of time it takes to do it manually. I'm like, this should just be built in. Let alone there should be so
Yep.
many tools for this. And like in 3D development, there should be retopology. There should be UV unwrapping. This should all be like a thing of the past. But for some reason, all of the difficult tasks are still there for us to do, and all the fun tasks are like all the fun tasks are getting taken by AI. It's the wrong way around.
I know what you're saying. I think it's a matter of time. I bet within a year or two we'll start to see that stuff because
Mm.
I think the coding with AI is starting to roll out more and more. And Google just announced something, and I'm using Copilot from Microsoft now. And it's like there are definitely solutions for that didn't exist a while ago. So maybe I don't, it's not like I know anything, but maybe next year there'll be something and you're just like, oh, thankfully I don't need to do this anymore.
Maybe I should see if I can get ChatGPT to write the script for Adobe Premiere.
Yeah,
I bet
yeah,
you that might be something I could do.
it
I'll
might be able
put
to.
that to the test.
It would probably need a lot of tweaking.
Yeah.
They say it's a very iterative process.
Yeah, I haven't really been able to get code that I find is more useful than just writing it out because you have to end up going through and fixing things.
You know what I found is sometimes I don't think it needs to be more useful. I think it just needs to save you a few seconds here and there so that you don't lose your train of thought. And I think context switching while you're coding is worse than like not. I don't know how to say this. Anyway, context switching while coding is bad. And so if you can use an AI to write out a tiny function even or an if statement or something like that, it just prevents you from having to think, how do I do this? Maybe having to go to a website to find the documentation or Stack Overflow to see how other people did it. And that alone just kind of smooths out the experience. But
Hmm.
it's still in its infancy. It'll probably get better.
I think it's probably good for, especially if you're learning, because like I know that was just an example, but you'll be very familiar with the basic stuff like if statements, for loops, whatever.
Yeah.
But if you're just learning, that might, I think it could be a really useful tool for learning, and not just programming, but learning anything really.
Yeah, I think so too, especially with learning programming, not knowing the syntax of something and then
Mm.
not wanting to look it up and yeah, not
Or not
struggling
even
around.
knowing what to look up because sometimes there's weird names for them that you don't know when you're starting off.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Okay, so wait, let me find one more thing because there were a bunch of things that I was interested in. I want to make sure. This one. Do you think you'll be live streaming for the next 5 years?
That actually I get asked that one a lot.
Yeah.
And I think because people are like, when you're done the game, are you gonna still stream or if this and that, are you gonna still stream? Like, I think so because I really do enjoy it. I feel so grateful and lucky to be able to connect with so many interesting and smart people. That's one thing about Twitch is like, yes, you don't really, you don't really, people don't really find you very easily. But I do find that the ones that do, especially the ones that stick around, it's so many interesting people. Like sometimes I ask a question and it's so obscure, and like you got to be really smart to know the answer, and so many people know.
Yep.
It's so cool. Like so many smart people hang out on like software and development and Twitch. It's really really cool.
Yeah, and I don't know how that happens sometimes, as in like toward the end of my last streaming gig, I was doing some very niche projects. One of them was I was making an NES game. So not something that people do nowadays and something that mostly happened during the late 80s. And yet people came in and they're like, "Oh, this is what you want or this is how you do this thing." And I was like, "How do they even how do people find me?" It's either they were there already and they just didn't show that they knew that knowledge or that stream title got them in or something. So yeah, very
Hmm.
fortuitous. I also feel this sort of luck and to some extent privilege that comes with that. But yeah, so
Yeah.
I would also probably want to stream for as long as I can.
Yeah. And even I don't know like if the consistency will stay the same because I mean it makes sense right now. My life is very much dedicated to my project.
Mhm.
Um if my life changes, I might not stream all day every day anymore, but I would like to continue streaming to some capacity, like
Yeah,
forever, basically. I think it's really cool to be able to do it.
yeah, I agree. I think the way I sum it up is I just want to do things I'm interested in and share it with other people. And it's hard to find people to share some things with in just the locality of wherever you are, because
Hmm.
who knows how many people want to make an NES ROM in my town or city, right?
Hmm.
And whether I'd want to invite them over to my house to say like, okay, let's tinker with this thing together.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great way to connect with people on niche topics. That's absolutely a major pro to streaming. I have a question for you that I know people will want to have answers to.
yeah.
You worked at Google. A lot of developers, especially a lot of developers on social media, it seems, would love to work at Google. Do you have any suggestions, recommendations, tips? How did you get into Google? What to expect at Google? Tell us about it.
Yeah. So the getting in, unfortunately, a lot of these big US centric tech companies, their pipeline for hiring developers is do leak code. And and for those who don't know, it's basically like programming problems that are graded by easy, medium, or hard. And you typically have to focus a lot on more of the mediums and hards and be able to explain your thought process. And then it's not so much, I don't know. I've heard stories from other people talking about interviews in different countries, and I haven't done them, but they're more what I would say is like fair interviews where they're like, okay, what's your experience? What makes you qualified for this job? So it really feels like a very intense test. And because this test is so standardized, people have gotten very good at the test because they know what goes into it. And so they do a lot of leak code and they just get better and better and better. And so that raises the bar for you to have to do this stuff. And now I've been on the other side of things. I've interviewed people. I've done this style of problem. I've also done the behavioral questions with people. And I myself found myself thinking, okay, this person got this segment of it, but not this segment of it. And I've seen people who are better than them. So I know that they meet that bar and I'm more willing to give my, yes, I will hire this person stamp of approval. So unfortunately, that was at least my experience. It is kind of work through a lot of these problems, shore up any algorithmic or data structure flaws you might have. And then, you get a shot at jobs like this. Uh, I don't think everyone should aspire to work at jobs like this because I don't think it is necessarily what they envision. I think there's this sense of like, I don't know, I've made it or something like that. I don't think that's true. I think if you find fulfillment from your job, if you're happy, if it's able to sustain you monetarily, that's what our metrics should be. So with that said, the other part of your question was what was it like to work there and everything. I was a remote employee for the 3 years I was there. So I was working from pretty much the same spot that you see me now in this blue void. And once the pandemic was once we returned to office, I could have changed my contract and I could have gone in. I was still local at the time, but I decided not to, and I still worked from home. Uh, I think it is very like fun and cool to work in the office. That's a conclusion I came to despite having been remote. Google's culture is built a lot around like we give you free food and we have a lot of cool things on campus. The
Yeah.
one near me, the office near me has a jellyfish tank that spans like half a wall and you can just sit there and like watch jellyfish. That is not something that most offices have.
That's
So
my dream.
yeah, it was really cool. And like they have massage chairs and stuff. And so it's all that sort of tech culture that you hear about. And yeah, I definitely think being there in person makes it better to experience. The work side of things, Google also really cares about developer experience. So everything was kind of easy breezy, just kind of set up an environment. Who cares about how much it takes resourcing wise? Like we'll give it to you. So there were a lot of perks to working there. Just yeah, in the end, the fulfillment wasn't there for me. Which
What
yeah,
wasn't there for you, sorry?
the fulfillment and
Mm,
I don't know if it sounds like I don't know too privileged to talk about, but yeah, it just I don't know different strokes, different folks.
absolutely, and I don't I hear where you're coming from, but, like, if you're not getting fulfilled, you can't force that. You can't pretend you are, even if you feel like it's something that you should get fulfilled from. Feeling like you should get fulfilled does not equal getting fulfilled, right?
Yeah, it doesn't, and I think working on that I think it's like there's a path toward almost anything in our lives. It's like if we want to master a skill, if we want to go meet a certain person, if we want to move to a part of the world, there are paths for all of those things. And the path to getting fulfillment from that job then must have existed by my own statement just there then. And I think it was a path that I just didn't want to pursue. So
Mm,
it's kind of how I frame it, I suppose. And that if you could easily get something a different route, then why not pursue that route? So that's at least how I conclude that.
easily is about to be debatable depending on more easily. I don't know if it's gonna be more easily. Maybe you'll get the fulfillment, but there's always a challenge, um, you know, without the stability of a 9 to 5 and a job like a Google job, have the stress of entrepreneurship and all that comes with that. So it might not be easier, but it definitely, you'll get the fulfillment, or at least you have a good chance of getting fulfillment. Then you can work on the other things.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And this is something I think a lot of people overlook when they think of going into game dev or pursuing their own thing. They think it's going to be like 95% game dev or the other thing that you're doing. And it turns out to be a lot of management, a lot of research, a lot of business, taxes, legal, whatever else. And then you end up doing at some points like 30% game dev for that week. And yeah, so I don't know what phase you're in now. And I know you mentioned about Strain that you're probably in the order of months from releasing it as opposed to, years from now. Is that true?
It's
Is,
hard to say.
is
It's
it what
hard
you'd
to
like?
say. I
Okay.
mean, that's the plan, but I don't
Well,
know.
and so what I was going to ask, and you've released games before, um, you're in the, what's that saying? Once you've done the first 90%, you have to do the second 90%.
Yeah.
You're in the second 90% right now. So what does your day to day look like?
Well, it's funny, like right now I'm typically my day-to-day is programming, asset creation, adding in a little feature here or fixing one there or altering it or fixing a bug, that kind of thing. Um, but I'm at a point now where I've got all of these different parts of the game and I need to kind of tie them together.
Hmm.
And so I've actually spent the last couple days just, well, I've been doing this in the evenings, but I'm like I'm blocked by it. So now this has been my days and my nights is going through like solidifying the story, making sure it's final, so that I can put in and then tying it with the progression of the gameplay, the the actual like mechanics and like making sure it all kind of ties together and really planning that out really well. I've done this a number of times, but um, I did testing a little while back. I made some changes, and now I'm putting it back together to like bring it into like a playable, testable game again.
Yeah.
And each time I do it, it gets better, and each time I do it, it gets to be like less changes. But I'm in that stage right now where I'm just sitting and planning and writing, and I want to be programming. I want to be doing art, but I need to get this done. So I just got to get myself to do it.
Yeah. Well, and putting your all toward it, I think that's kind of what you mentioned earlier. Is sometimes you need the extra sleep and to carve out that time. And sometimes I guess you need to just go full throttle on got to tie everything together. Once you're done with that, what goes into releasing it for you?
So, okay, this is an interesting topic, and what goes into releasing it? I mean, so many things. And with a project this big, it's going to be different from the last one, but it's a lot. You have like I almost feel like once the game's done, I'll need another like year to
Yeah.
plan the release. And that's not actually going to be the way I'm going to do it, but it would be ideal. You have to set yourself up for marketing. Um, Start marketing earlier than that. Ideally, start marketing when you can. Um, just planning how the release is going to go. I'm doing early access, but this is something I wanted to ask you about. Okay,
Yeah.
there's a game that came out recently. I don't know the details of it. So,
Is it the day before?
yes.
Okay.
And I'm curious what your thoughts on it are. And again, I don't know all the details, but it's like it's kind of been like a shocker as a developer to see this all play out.
So the last I heard is they just shuttered their company
Mhm.
and they said that we couldn't meet expectations or something like that.
Mhm.
And before that, all I knew is that there were, I think, 18,000 overwhelmingly negative reviews on Steam. So I don't want to speculate too much. So I won't. I'll just say, I think these things happen. We sometimes get ourselves into situations that we didn't expect. And there's backlash sometimes. And honestly, the way that they did things by closing their company is probably for the best given how many negative reviews there were. It's like, how do you pull back from that? And the
Mm.
only games I can really think of that did, No Man's Sky, they
Mhm.
released and they had terrible reviews and then they
Mhm.
turned things around. And I want to say Cyberpunk, but I'm not actually sure how it started or how it ended. But that's the other game that I have in my head of like maybe they turn things around. So I think it takes a ton of time and a lot of resources. And if you can't spend it, you can't spend it.
That you know what? Thank you for reminding me of those two because you're right. I was thinking like, oh my gosh, everyone's saying it's a scam, it's a scam. I'm like, I think the developers just kind of like didn't deliver on what was expected, and their what they set up of expectations was not aligned with what people like what people were expecting was not aligned with what they're
Yeah.
releasing. And this concept of early access is such a spectrum to the recipient. Like you're a game developer, you might be like, this is like an early version of the game. Let us know what you think. We're gonna be working it for a long time, and it's gonna get to this version, but this is it now.
Yep.
Where some gamers might think the game's released, I'm gonna play it, it's gonna be the end product, like or close to.
Yeah, and I've had that, like you said, as a recipient, I've had that happen too. Both ways. There is one other thing I want to look up really fast here.
Mhm.
A game that started poorly that I don't know how it ended, but Warcraft 3 Reforged. Have you have you followed that at all? Let's see.
No.
Its Metacritic rating is 0.6. So that's the game that was released that unfortunately I guess never kind of climbed back up, and it's not like the company closed down. It's now owned by Microsoft, but yeah.
Yeah. But you're right. The fact that you brought up those other two, sometimes game developers or companies do screw up and they do get a huge negative backlash. And it is very like intimidating to watch that happen and play out for games. Especially when like Cyberpunk was still like very impressive game. It just wasn't what people were expecting, or maybe not. It wasn't really what they were advertising, or at least the bugs were more than expected. All these kinds
Yeah.
of things. But you're right. There is opportunity to fix these situations. At least No Man's Sky. There's a lot of people who really like it now.
Oh yeah.
Same with Cyberpunk. A lot of people, now it's great. We're okay now. So I guess there's opportunity to. It's not like the end, and maybe this game will find a way. I don't even know if they even want to. If that's something that they would like to do, is fix the problems. But at least that sort of exists as an opportunity.
I guess I think if they did close the company, it's probably they're not even going to put in the effort. I think it's something like what you said. You're going to finish your game. Ideally, you'd have a year to do marketing on it. Imagine if you saw it as ideally I'd have 15 years to do marketing on it. You might see that as so daunting a task that you're like, I'd just rather do other things with my life. I think that's probably what might have played out of like, okay, we have a long time to do this. Maybe we don't have the expertise. And it's not that we couldn't build it, but by the time we do, who are we even talking to? Is our Steam audience out there still? Are these people who left overwhelmingly negative reviews? Are they going to come back? Are they going to change them? Are they, I don't know. So they must have determined, okay, it's not worth it. And yeah, I think that happens. Um, there is another question I thought of. If you could snap your fingers and you could say there is some game dev task that is going to get done to my standard of perfection and I don't have to pay a dime for it, what is the section of game dev you would shovel off to somebody else?
It's funny. The last podcast this came up, and we were laughing at, like, wouldn't it be great to just hire someone to fix all your bugs? But you know what? I actually don't mind bug fixing. It's just that
Mhm.
the mental state of it is like, I'm gonna be making steps forward, where this is just like, it feels like treading water,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
It doesn't feel like you're making progress when you're bug fixing. But I do actually like that task. Um, the task that I do hire for the most is retopologizing characters.
Yeah.
So, like, getting those lines to, like, blend the grid on the
Mhm.
face and, like, on the clothes and stuff to, like, blend and make, like, a nice geometric shape. I get so frustrated. It's like, it's not even it's not even like, it doesn't seem daunting, but, like, when I'm doing it, I'm like, "Got this way and that way." I just get so stressed out for no reason.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I have tasks like that. I think for me, I would farm out marketing. I feel like marketing is just some gigantic beast and it's also pretty expensive. But individual tasks on a game, and I haven't worked on a game in a while, but I feel like animations. I think
Oh, never
that's
mind, I
my
changed my answer.
sticking
Can I
point
change
right
my
now.
answer?
Okay, you want to change it to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, animations. I just and you want them for everything, right? UI things. You want particle effects. You want characters to look realistic, or you want nice sprite based animations for 2D games. So yeah, there's a
Yeah.
lot that goes into that.
But you're right with marketing, and that is something that I think is a big takeaway from all of these games that had really poor reception, is that you wanna make sure that the game that is going into people's hands,
Hmm.
whether it's early access or release, is very well communicated what it's gonna be and very accurate to what they're going to receive. Someone even had said in chat today, they played a game, I forget which one, and it says right on it, as soon as you load it up, this is a work in progress, just
Yeah,
so that the players are reminded, and conveying, like, communicating well, I think is so important, more important than having an overhyped game, because then you end up having to clean up that mess.
I agree. I think the communication needs to match what happens in reality, but I also think getting the audience to communicate too is not very easy for a lot of games or a lot of studios. So it's like we both stream, we have some audience through that. You hope that you get enough wish lists on Steam that the algorithm kind of explodes and takes off and that the game is good too and it's well received. But then there are some people out there who probably are like, well, where do I start? How do I get my first user or my first gamer or something like that? How do I get someone else to enjoy this so that they might spread it to other people? And I see games on Steam that by all means they look good, but for whatever reason they kind of top out at like 50 or 100 reviews and then that's it.
Mm.
So anyway, this is a much larger topic and I do see we're sort of close to time. So
We can keep talking, it doesn't I feel like we've got lots to say, don't feel like we need to stay on any major schedule, 'cause yeah, and it's interesting. I would love to hear your thoughts on it as well. Um, Marketing games, yeah, I think we are kind of lucky. That is one thing that indie devs or any kind of entrepreneurial type person to work in any project. Uh, I know social media has a lot of negative sides to it. Don't get me wrong, but it can be a really useful tool because we never used to have or a way to reach many people without having to pay a lot of money. And if you're making a game or doing a project on a budget, it's actually like it could be a very powerful tool, I think, especially with that topic.
I think so too. I think I think of the sort of eras of technology and social media and everything, and I think back to like when the N64 was released, late 90s, and I thought about what was it like playing games then? And it was you spent, at least in the US, about $50 on a game, and then you would have it for a certain amount of time because there were not a flood of games back then. It just didn't happen. It's not like nowadays you have people who have like 50 Steam games in their library that they've never even played sometimes. And it's like, okay, well, that definitely would have never happened. And so back then, you didn't have social media, but also the release cadence for games was so different. Even the development time for games, it's like the newest Zelda took, I forgot how long, 5+ years to make or something. Games didn't take that long back then. They wrote some NES games in like a month or two.
Really?
So I think so. I think
Wow.
these were like experienced studios. I want to say maybe this is something I'm making up off the top of my head. But anyway, the point here is I think we have social media, but also we get the negatives that come with that of uh, incredibly flooded game market, very low barrier to entry now too. And that's a good thing to some extent, right? We have a lot of game engines. It's not like people have to write their own renderers anymore, and now we have the pros and the cons of that. So yeah, I think one of the pros is reach without necessarily needing to pay for it. I think that is somewhat limited on its own. I think there's only so many people you can reach with the tools you have without spending money on ads or something.
I think you just need to be creative
Yeah.
or make a game that really stands out or both, ideally, right? I think that's one thing that is so frustrating in life is when you're limited by the amount of money you have and people around you are beating you because they have more money or you can never even do the thing you want to do because you don't have money. Like even when I was a kid, I want to get into 3D so bad, but I couldn't. Like my parents, it was like thousands of dollars for the software and my parents were like,
Mhm.
you're a child, like we're not going to spend thousands of dollars on software that you might get lose interest in a week. Right.
Yeah.
So like that barrier to entry was there for so long and it sucked. Only like you had to, I don't know, like I don't even, you maybe had to like fully commit and go to university for it or whatever. But like removing that financial barrier, I just feel like it's a good step to remove financial barriers for people to be able to pursue an education, something to pursue a career in something. I think that's a positive thing.
So, okay, I totally agree. I now see what you're coming at with the you just got to be creative. I agree with you there. And I also agree that you got to be creative. Necessity is the mother of invention. If you didn't have a budget and you still needed to reach people, you'd find ways to do it. You'd network with people. Yeah, so don't get me wrong. I definitely think it's a good thing that we have lowered the barrier to entry and also the cost to entry. And this is one of the things I think is great about programming in general. I get a lot of questions about how do I get started? How do I get to the point where I'm making games, or how do I get into a company or something like that? And I say, you live in the best time for this, because same thing, when I was growing up, it's not that I was interested in 3D and needed to spend thousands of dollars, but it was like learning programming was you had to get a physical book and you had to hope that the author was good and that their writing style resonated with you, and that you had access to the tools or the computing time. It used to be, even way before my time, that you needed to get just access to a computer. Now that's not a problem, right? I just bought like a new laptop for a reasonable amount of money. It definitely would not have been that way a long time ago. And
Right.
so I think this leads to just this kind of burst of knowledge. And it's what we were talking about with AI. It's going to just keep growing and growing. And now we have more developers than ever and more game developers than ever. And yeah, I want to see what games look like 5 years from now or 10 years from now.
Me too. I've got one more question for you.
Mhm.
Um, so you're doing educational stuff. Do you have plans to do specifically game development again? Or do you have like what's your plans in terms of upcoming game development or in general, what are your upcoming plans?
Yeah. So I made Botland over the course of about 4 years, and everyone kept joking, oh, Botland 2, Botland 2, when is Botland 2 coming out? And I have made probably something like 6 or 7 game design documents that could be classified as a Botland 2. So someday there will probably come a Botland 2. I don't know what it'll look like. I don't know exactly what it's going to be. But I think my a lot of what I like about just being creative. I like the idea of coming up with ideas that don't have legs, I guess I should say. So, for example, um, I at one point made a program that lets you type English words on a piano. I don't think this really has a purpose, but it was the kind of thing where I thought it would be fun to work on this, and I just went and did it. And so with games, a lot of times, I think there are experiences that will never really have monetary viability, but would be really fun as games. Something where it's like, look, I just show up to stream one day, and I guess a good example is alternate reality games, where there's just a phone number in a trailer of a movie, and you call that phone number, and they answer, and they say the next clue is whatever, and then they lead you on this string of things. So I'd love to do more experiences like that. I think if I somehow get established such that just the streaming aspect is pulling in money and not necessarily me producing services and products, that I would probably do more on those lines just to kind of explore that area.
Yeah. It's a fun one for sure.
Yeah, I think it'd
Yeah.
be really cool.
That
By
would
the
be
way, do
fun.
you know what your like post strain plans are? Not that they're necessarily in the near future.
Um, I am not there mentally. I
Okay,
am just
totally.
focusing on getting it done. And also I I'm gonna be playing it by ear depending how things go. So I don't wanna stick to one thing until I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how it
Yeah,
goes.
no,
Yeah.
that's totally fine. And you said other things are up in the air with like location where you're living, and so I imagine it's not just what's happening post strain. But yeah, keep your eyes on the prize. Sounds like a
Right.
plan.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you. How can people find your work, find you, any of that stuff?
So I think going to twitch.tv/AdamLearns live is probably best. That can serve as a jumping off point for any other things, which is not a lot right now. I'm basically just active on Twitch and maybe YouTube. So Google Adam Learns and you'll find something.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining. It's been great chatting with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, Lana.
All right. Well, thanks and take care.
Yep,
Bye
bye.
bye.